In the aftermath of the Great War, there was a grand gathering of world leaders in the Palace of Versailles, just outside Paris. The year was 1919, and the world had just witnessed the end of World War I, a conflict that had devastated nations and claimed millions of lives. The purpose of this gathering was to negotiate and sign a peace treaty that would bring an end to the hostilities. Little did they know that the Treaty of Versailles would plant the seeds of discord that would later grow into the devastating World War II. The stage was set, and the leaders of the victorious Allied powers, including President Woodrow Wilson of the United States, Prime Minister David Lloyd George of the United Kingdom, and Premier Georges Clemenceau of France, convened to discuss the terms of peace. However, the atmosphere in the room was far from harmonious. The treaty negotiations were fraught with tension from the very beginning. Germany, which had borne the brunt of the blame for the war in the eyes of the Allies, was not invited to participate in the talks initially. Instead, the terms of the treaty were dictated to the German delegation when they arrived later. This act of exclusion and humiliation left a deep scar on the German national psyche, setting the stage for future grievances. The Treaty of Versailles imposed severe penalties on Germany. The nation was forced to accept full responsibility for the war, resulting in enormous reparations payments and the loss of territory. The treaty also limited the size of the German military and placed restrictions on their ability to rebuild their armed forces. To add insult to injury, Germany was not allowed to join the newly formed League of Nations, an international organization aimed at promoting peace and cooperation. As Germany struggled to meet the stringent demands of the Treaty of Versailles, the economic situation within the country deteriorated rapidly. The reparations payments, combined with the loss of industrial territory, crippled the German economy. Hyperinflation ran rampant, making the German mark virtually worthless. People struggled to buy even basic necessities. In the midst of this economic turmoil, a charismatic and fervent politician named Adolf Hitler began to gain prominence. Hitler, who had served as a soldier in World War I, used the widespread anger and resentment in Germany to his advantage. He blamed the Treaty of Versailles for the nation's suffering and promised to restore Germany to its former glory. As Hitler rose to power, he dismantled the restrictions placed on the German military and embarked on a campaign of territorial expansion. His aggressive actions, such as the annexation of Austria and the occupation of the Sudetenland in Czechoslovakia, were met with appeasement by the Western powers, who hoped to avoid another war at all costs. The memory of the Great War was still fresh in their minds, and they were desperate to prevent a new conflict. However, Hitler's ambitions knew no bounds. In 1939, he shocked the world by invading Poland, an act that directly violated the Treaty of Versailles and triggered the start of World War II. The treaty that was meant to secure peace had, in fact, sowed the seeds of a new and even more destructive conflict. The Treaty of Versailles, with its punitive measures and exclusionary approach, played a pivotal role in setting the stage for World War II. It left Germany in a state of economic and political turmoil, creating the conditions for the rise of Adolf Hitler and his aggressive expansionist agenda. The failure of the treaty to achieve lasting peace highlights the importance of diplomacy, compromise, and a deeper understanding of the complex dynamics that can lead to conflict on a global scale. As the world would soon learn, the Treaty of Versailles was not the end of the story but rather the beginning of a new and even darker chapter in history. The 1920s, often referred to as the Roaring Twenties, were a time of exuberance and economic growth in the United States and other parts of the world. Technological advancements, such as the mass production of automobiles, fueled a consumer revolution. Jazz music played through the streets, and the stock market seemed to soar endlessly. The end of World War I had brought optimism, but it had also left scars. Europe was in ruins, and the war had caused immense debt for many nations. However, the United States appeared to be an exception. It emerged from the war as an economic powerhouse, its industrial might untouched by the conflict. The optimism of the 1920s, however, was built on a fragile foundation. In October 1929, the stock market in the United States, which had been riding a wave of speculation, crashed dramatically. The Wall Street crash of 1929 sent shockwaves through the global economy. As stock prices plummeted, panic set in, and investors rushed to sell their holdings. The crash wiped out fortunes, leading to a cascade of business failures and a sharp rise in unemployment. People who had once enjoyed the luxuries of the Roaring Twenties found themselves standing in breadlines. The economic collapse in the United States had a domino effect that rippled across the world. International trade dried up as countries implemented protectionist policies, imposing tariffs and quotas to shield their industries from foreign competition. This isolationism only exacerbated the economic woes. In Germany, the effects of the Great Depression were particularly severe. The country was already reeling from the economic burden imposed by the Treaty of Versailles, and the sudden economic downturn pushed millions of Germans into unemployment and poverty. It was in this environment that extremist political groups, including the Nazi Party, gained support. Throughout the 1930s, governments tried various measures to combat the economic crisis. In the United States, President Franklin D. Roosevelt introduced the New Deal, a series of programs aimed at providing relief, recovery, and reform. These included public works projects, social welfare programs, and banking reforms. However, recovery was slow and uneven. It wasn't until the outbreak of World War II in 1939 that the global economy finally began to rebound. The war effort created jobs and stimulated industrial production, effectively pulling nations out of the economic doldrums. The Great Depression left an indelible mark on the world. It exposed the vulnerabilities of the global economy and the interconnectedness of nations. It also demonstrated the need for effective government intervention in times of crisis. Moreover, the economic turmoil of the 1930s had a direct link to the outbreak of World War II. The rise of extremist ideologies and the desperation of people affected by the Depression contributed to the political climate that allowed Adolf Hitler to come to power in Germany and pursue aggressive expansionist policies. In the early 20th century, Italy found itself at a crossroads. The aftermath of World War I had left the nation disillusioned and economically strained. It was in this turbulent environment that a charismatic leader named Benito Mussolini rose to power, paving the way for the establishment of the fascist regime in Italy. This story explores the rise of fascism in Italy and its impact on the nation. Italy, like many other European nations, had borne the heavy burden of World War I. The conflict had drained its resources, left its economy in shambles, and resulted in the loss of countless lives. The Italian people were left with a sense of disillusionment and frustration, feeling that their sacrifices had not been adequately rewarded. Amid this atmosphere of unrest, Benito Mussolini, a former socialist and journalist, emerged as a charismatic and forceful leader. Mussolini founded the National Fascist Party in 1921, a political movement that promised to restore Italy to its former glory. He rallied his followers with fiery speeches and a vision of a powerful and unified Italy. Mussolini's moment of reckoning came in October 1922 when he and his black shirt paramilitary units marched on Rome. The aim was to pressure the Italian king, Victor Emmanuel III, to appoint Mussolini as the prime minister. Fearing a potential civil war, the king acquiesced, and Mussolini assumed the position of prime minister on October 29, 1922. Mussolini's rise to power marked the beginning of a new era in Italian politics. He quickly consolidated his authority, dissolved opposition parties, and suppressed dissent through censorship and intimidation. Mussolini's regime was characterized by authoritarianism, nationalism, and the suppression of individual freedoms. Under Mussolini's leadership, Italy underwent a radical transformation. Mussolini aimed to create a totalitarian state where the interests of the individual were subjugated to the needs of the nation. He centralized power, promoted a cult of personality, and sought to control every aspect of Italian life. The fascist regime implemented policies that emphasized strict control over the media, education, and the economy. Dissent was not tolerated, and those who opposed the regime faced persecution. Mussolini's vision of a revitalized Italy was pursued at the expense of personal freedoms and civil liberties. Mussolini's ambitions extended beyond Italy's borders. He sought to expand Italy's territory and influence in the Mediterranean and beyond. In 1935, Italy invaded Ethiopia, a move that drew international condemnation. This act of aggression would later lead Italy to align itself with Nazi Germany in the lead-up to World War II. The fascist regime faced growing challenges as the 1930s progressed. Economic problems persisted, and Italy's aggressive foreign policies drew it into conflicts that strained its resources. In 1943, as Allied forces advanced through Italy, Mussolini was arrested, and the fascist regime began to crumble. The fascist regime in Italy, under the leadership of Benito Mussolini, was marked by authoritarianism, the suppression of dissent, and a cult of personality. Mussolini's ambitions led Italy down a path of aggression and ultimately into World War II. In the turbulent years following World War I, Germany was grappling with economic devastation, political turmoil, and a sense of national humiliation brought about by the Treaty of Versailles. In this challenging environment, a dark force began to rise, the Nazi Party. Led by Adolf Hitler, the Nazis would go on to shape the course of history in the most sinister of ways. This story unfolds the ascent of the Nazi Party in Germany. As the 1920s dawned, Germany was a nation in crisis. The Treaty of Versailles imposed harsh penalties on the country, including massive reparations, territorial losses, and strict limitations on its military. Hyperinflation had rendered the German mark nearly worthless, and unemployment soared. It was in this atmosphere of anger, resentment, and economic despair that the seeds of extremism took root. Various political factions, including the Communist Party and the National Socialist German Workers' Party, commonly known as the Nazi Party, vied for the allegiance of a disillusioned population. The Nazi Party emerged from the shadows in the early 1920s. Founded in Munich in 1920 by Adolf Hitler, the party's early years were marked by obscurity and limited influence. Hitler, a charismatic and persuasive speaker, attracted a small but devoted following. The Nazis espoused a nationalist and anti-Semitic ideology. They blamed the Jews, along with other perceived enemies, for Germany's woes and advocated for the creation of a racially pure German state. The party's emblem, the swastika, became a symbol of hatred and oppression. In 1923, the Nazis attempted to seize power in what became known as the Beer Hall Putsch. Hitler and his followers, armed with rifles, marched on a beer hall in Munich where government officials were meeting. The coup failed, and Hitler was arrested and sentenced to prison. While in prison, Hitler wrote Mein Kampf, an autobiographical manifesto in which he outlined his vision for Germany and his hatred for Jews. It would become a foundational text for Nazi ideology. Upon his release from prison, Hitler realized that a violent coup would not bring him to power. Instead, he adopted a strategy of using the democratic system to gain influence. The Nazis began participating in elections and slowly but steadily garnered support. The worldwide economic depression of the 1930s created fertile ground for extremist parties like the Nazis. As the existing political order faltered, many Germans turned to radical solutions. In the July 1932 elections, the Nazi Party became the largest party in the Reichstag, Germany's parliament. With their newfound electoral strength, the Nazis pressured President Paul von Hindenburg to appoint Hitler as Chancellor of Germany in January 1933. Hitler's appointment marked the beginning of a dark chapter in German history. Once in power, the Nazis wasted no time in consolidating their control. They swiftly passed the Reichstag Fire Decree, which suspended civil liberties and allowed for the arrest of political opponents. The Enabling Act, passed in March 1933, effectively granted Hitler dictatorial powers. Over the next few years, the Nazis solidified their grip on Germany. They implemented a totalitarian regime characterized by censorship, propaganda, and the suppression of dissent. They initiated a campaign of persecution against Jews and other minority groups, culminating in the horrors of the Holocaust. The ascent of the Nazi Party in Germany and its subsequent actions would lead to the darkest chapter in human history, World War II and the Holocaust. Millions of lives would be lost, and the world would be forever changed. Amid the global turmoil of the early 20th century, Another dark chapter in history was unfolding in the Far East, Imperial Japan's relentless expansionism. This story sheds light on Japan's quest for territorial dominance, militarization, and its role in setting the stage for World War II in the Pacific. At the turn of the 20th century, Japan had undergone a remarkable transformation. Emerging from centuries of isolation, it embraced modernization and industrialization with zeal. The Meiji Restoration in the late 19th century ushered in a new era, where Japan rapidly modernized its economy and military. Japan's newfound strength allowed it to assert itself on the world stage. In 1905, it shocked the world by defeating Russia in the Russo-Japanese War, becoming the first Asian power to defeat a European nation in a modern conflict. Japan's appetite for expansion began to manifest itself in Asia. In 1910, it formally annexed Korea, a move that marked the beginning of its imperial ambitions in the region. The Japanese government implemented a policy of assimilation, seeking to erase Korean culture and language. As Japan expanded its influence, it took control of Chinese territories during the First Sino-Japanese War and later occupied Manchuria in 1931. These aggressive actions were met with international condemnation, but Japan pressed on with its expansionist agenda. Japan's militarization went hand in hand with its expansionist policies. The military, known as the Imperial Japanese Army, gained significant power and influence in Japanese politics. It pursued an aggressive agenda and viewed conquest as a means of securing resources and prestige. The military also became increasingly intertwined with Japan's government and industry. This fusion of interests led to a state-controlled economy geared towards war production, further driving Japan's militaristic. In 1937, Japan's invasion of China marked the beginning of the Second Sino-Japanese War. The conflict raged on for years, resulting in widespread devastation and loss of life. The international community, including the United States, imposed economic sanctions on Japan in response to its aggression. The events in Asia, particularly Japan's expansionism and its invasion of China, were a prelude to a larger conflict. In 1941, Japan launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, bringing the United States into World War II. This marked the beginning of the Pacific Theater, a brutal and far-reaching conflict that would shape the course of the war. Japan's expansionist agenda had now brought it into direct conflict with the world's major powers. The battles that followed in the Pacific and Southeast Asia were characterized by fierce fighting, island-hopping campaigns, and the use of new and devastating weapons. The legacy of Imperial Japan's expansionism is one of pain and suffering. Millions of lives were lost in the wake of its aggression, and entire nations were left scarred by its actions. The conflict in the Pacific Theater witnessed some of the most ferocious battles in history, including the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan's expansionist ambitions led to its defeat and occupation by Allied forces. The post-war era saw Japan undergo significant political and social reforms, renouncing its militarism and embracing a path of peaceful coexistence. As the summer of 1939 drew to a close, Europe stood on the precipice of a cataclysmic event that would plunge the world into another devastating conflict, World War II. On September 1, 1939, the peace in Europe was shattered when Nazi Germany, under the leadership of Adolf Hitler, launched a full-scale invasion of Poland. This act of aggression would trigger a chain reaction, leading to the outbreak of the most destructive war in human history. In the years leading up to 1939, tensions had been steadily rising in Europe. Adolf Hitler, the Chancellor of Germany, had been aggressively pursuing a policy of territorial expansion. His ambitions extended far beyond Germany's borders, and he aimed to create a greater German empire that encompassed much of Eastern Europe. One of Hitler's key objectives was the acquisition of Danzig and the Polish Corridor, a strip of land that separated East Prussia from the rest of Germany. The Polish Corridor had been awarded to Poland following World War I, and its loss was a source of great resentment for Germany. On August 23, 1939, just days before the invasion, Germany and the Soviet Union, led by Joseph Stalin, signed the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, a non-aggression treaty. This pact contained a secret protocol that divided Eastern Europe into spheres of influence, effectively granting the Soviets a free hand in the Baltic states and eastern Poland. The pact served as a green light for Hitler to proceed with his plans to invade Poland. He was now confident that the Soviet Union would not intervene. On the morning of September 1, 1939, the world watched in shock as German forces stormed across the Polish border. The invasion was characterized by a swift and brutal blitzkrieg, or lightning war, strategy. German tanks, infantry, and air support overwhelmed the Polish defenses. The Polish military, though valiant and determined, was ill-equipped to deal with the onslaught of the highly mechanized and well-organized German forces. Within weeks, Poland was encircled and besieged. The invasion of Poland sent shockwaves across Europe and the world. The international community reacted with condemnation, and both France and the United Kingdom declared war on Germany on September 3, 1939, honoring their commitments to Poland. However, the response from Western allies was limited. The war in Poland largely remained a one-sided affair, as the Soviet Union launched its invasion of eastern Poland on September 17, 1939. The Poles found themselves caught between two powerful aggressors. The invasion of Poland marked the official beginning of World War II. For the Polish people, it meant years of occupation, oppression, and suffering under both Nazi and Soviet rule. The world watched as the principles of sovereignty and self-determination were trampled upon. The events in Poland set in motion a chain of events that would lead to a global conflict of unprecedented scale. The war would rage on for 6 years, cost tens of millions of lives, and reshape the world in ways that are still felt today. In the wake of the swift and brutal invasion of Poland in September 1939, Europe was gripped by a tense calm, a period that would come to be known as the Phony War. This story delves into the strange and uncertain interlude between the outbreak of World War II and the full-scale onslaught of conflict. Following the invasion of Poland, the world had expected an immediate and decisive response from the Western Allies, particularly France and the United Kingdom, who had declared war on Nazi Germany in defense of Poland. However, what followed was a strange and perplexing period of inaction. This curious lull in the fighting, which lasted from September 1939 to April 1940, would later be referred to as the Phony War or the Sitzkrieg, because of the apparent lack of major military operations on the Western Front. Several factors contributed to the cautious approach taken by the Western Allies during this period. One of the key reasons was the legacy of World War I, which had left a deep scar on the collective memory. The horrors of trench warfare and the staggering loss of life were vivid in the minds of political leaders and the public alike. As a result, there was a strong desire to avoid a repeat of such a protracted and devastating conflict. The Western Allies hoped that diplomatic negotiations might bring a swift end to the hostilities, and they were hesitant to rush into battle without a clear strategy. France, in particular, relied heavily on the Maginot Line, a series of heavily fortified defenses along its border with Germany. The French believed that these fortifications would provide ample protection, rendering a German invasion nearly impossible. This belief in the impregnability of the Maginot Line contributed to a false sense of security. During the Phony War, there were some limited engagements and skirmishes along the Franco-German border, but these did not escalate into full-scale offensives. The British Expeditionary Force was deployed to France, but its role was primarily defensive. In the air, both the Royal Air Force and the German Luftwaffe engaged in sporadic battles, but these did not lead to any decisive outcomes. The naval war, however, was more active, with both sides conducting naval blockades and escort missions. The Phony War came to an abrupt end in April 1940 when Germany launched a massive offensive against France and the Low Countries. The blitzkrieg tactics that had proven so effective in Poland were now unleashed on a grander scale. The world watched in shock as German forces swiftly overran France and approached the English Channel. The complacency and hesitancy of the Western Allies during the Phony War had allowed Germany to regroup and plan a more significant offensive. The result was the fall of France and the beginning of a new phase in the war. The Phony War, though marked by inaction and a false sense of security, was a crucial phase in the early stages of World War II. It revealed the difficulties of transitioning from a state of peace to full-scale war, and the challenges of adapting to a rapidly changing battlefield. This period of calm, deceptive as it may have been, serves as a reminder that amid great historical events, there are moments of uncertainty and hesitation. As the world held its collective breath during the Phoney War, a storm was brewing within Nazi Germany. The calm of the preceding months was shattered in April 1940 when the German war machine unleashed a devastating new form of warfare, Blitzkrieg. This story explores the ruthless efficiency and lightning speed with which Germany conquered Western Europe. The term, Blitzkrieg, translates to lightning war in English, and it perfectly encapsulates the essence of this new military doctrine. Blitzkrieg was not a single tactic but a coordinated strategy that relied on surprise, speed, and overwhelming force to achieve rapid victories. The Germans had been refining this doctrine for years, and it was about to be put to the test. On May 10, 1940, German forces launched a massive invasion of France, Belgium, Luxembourg, and the Netherlands. The world watched in shock as the German army, equipped with tanks, artillery, and highly mobile infantry, swiftly advanced through the Ardennes forest, a region that had been considered impassable by the French. The Germans employed a combination of tactics that defined Blitzkrieg. Fast-moving panzer divisions led the way, followed closely by infantry and air support. Encirclement and cut-off tactics were used to isolate and overwhelm enemy forces, preventing them from regrouping or receiving reinforcements. The speed of the German advance was staggering. In just 6 weeks, German forces had penetrated deep into France, encircling the French and British expeditionary forces at Dunkirk. The evacuation of Dunkirk, known as the Miracle of Dunkirk, saved the lives of hundreds of thousands of Allied soldiers but left the French military reeling. The German army continued its relentless advance, capturing Paris on June 14, 1940. The French government, facing imminent defeat, surrendered to Germany on June 22, 1940, signing an armistice that effectively divided France into an occupied zone in the north and an unoccupied zone in the south. The success of Blitzkrieg in Western Europe sent shockwaves through military establishments around the world. The traditional tactics of trench warfare and static defenses had been rendered obsolete. The lessons learned from the rapid German victories would shape the strategies of the Allies in the years to come. Blitzkrieg was not only a military strategy but also a psychological weapon. The lightning speed of the German advance sowed panic and confusion among the defenders. The world had witnessed the devastating effectiveness of modern warfare, and the balance of power had shifted dramatically. The fall of France and the success of Blitzkrieg set the stage for further German expansion in Eastern Europe and the Balkans. It also made clear that the war was no longer confined to one region but had become a truly global conflict. Blitzkrieg, with its breathtaking speed and overwhelming force, was a game-changer in the early years of World War II. It redefined the art of warfare and left a lasting impact on military doctrine. In the spring of 1940, the world watched in disbelief as Nazi Germany's Blitzkrieg tactics tore through Western Europe with lightning speed. France, once considered a military powerhouse, fell to the relentless German advance in a matter of weeks. This story delves into the events that led to the fall of France in 1940. The stage was set for the fall of France when German forces launched a massive invasion of Western Europe on May 10, 1940. The German Blitzkrieg tactics, characterized by rapid and coordinated movements of tanks, infantry, and air support, took the French and their allies by surprise. The Germans, under the command of generals such as Heinz Guderian and Erwin Rommel, advanced with astonishing speed and agility. They bypassed heavily fortified positions along the Maginot Line, an extensive system of fortifications along the French-German border, and penetrated deep into France through the Ardennes forest, a region previously thought impassable for armored units. As the German army closed in on British and French forces, a desperate evacuation was launched at the port of Dunkirk. Operation Dynamo, as it was called, involved the rescue of over 330,000 Allied troops from the beaches of Dunkirk between May 26 and June 4, 1940. It was a miraculous operation that saved a significant portion of the British Expeditionary Force. The fall of France seemed inevitable as German forces continued their advance. On June 14, 1940, German troops entered Paris, marking a moment of profound humiliation for France. The French government, recognizing the dire situation, requested an armistice. On June 22, 1940, an armistice was signed between France and Nazi Germany. It divided France into two zones, an occupied zone in the north and a nominally independent, unoccupied Vichy government in the south. The city of Vichy became the symbolic center of the collaborationist government led by Marshal Philippe Pétain. The fall of France was a shocking and sobering moment for the Allies. It shattered the illusion of French invincibility and raised questions about the effectiveness of their military strategies and leadership. The swift and decisive success of Blitzkrieg's tactics had exposed vulnerabilities in traditional defensive tactics. With the fall of France, Germany gained control of a significant portion of Western Europe. It marked a turning point in World War II, as the Allies faced the daunting challenge of regrouping and planning their next moves. While France was occupied by German forces, a resistance movement began to take shape. Underground networks and partisan groups would play a vital role in the eventual liberation of France. The fall of France in 1940 was a pivotal moment in World War II. It demonstrated the power and effectiveness of Blitzkrieg tactics and forced the Allies to re-evaluate their strategies. France, once a symbol of European military might, had fallen, but the spirit of resistance lived on, and the struggle to liberate the country would become a defining chapter in the history of France and the Second World War. On the quiet Sunday morning of December 7, 1941, the world was jolted awake by a devastating surprise, an attack on the United States Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii. This story recounts the events of that fateful day, forever etched in history as the catalyst for the United States' entry into World War II. The attack on Pearl Harbor began at 7:55 a.m. when a wave of Japanese fighter planes and bombers descended upon the U.S. naval base. The assault was sudden, ferocious, and meticulously planned. Within minutes, battleships, cruisers, and aircraft were engulfed in flames and smoke. The attack was a masterstroke of military precision and coordination. The Japanese aircraft targeted the heart of the Pacific Fleet, including the battleships moored along Battleship Row. The USS Arizona, in particular, suffered a catastrophic explosion that sent it to the harbor's bottom, taking with it over 1,000 American lives. The attack on Pearl Harbor inflicted severe damage on the U.S. Pacific Fleet. 8 American battleships were either sunk or heavily damaged, along with numerous other vessels. Over 180 aircraft were destroyed, and more than 2,400 Americans lost their lives, with another 1,200 injured. The attack also plunged the United States into a state of shock and anger. President Franklin D. Roosevelt famously described December 7, 1941, as a date which will live in infamy. The following day, the United States declared war on Japan, officially entering World War II. The attack on Pearl Harbor was part of Japan's larger strategy to establish dominance in the Pacific. Japan sought to secure valuable resources and establish a sphere of influence in Southeast Asia and the Pacific Islands. In the months following Pearl Harbor, Japan rapidly expanded its territorial holdings, capturing an array of islands and territories across the Pacific, including Guam, Wake Island, the Philippines, and parts of New Guinea. In response to Japan's territorial advances, the United States devised a strategic counteroffensive in the Pacific known as the Island Hopping Campaign. This strategy, under the command of General Douglas MacArthur and Admiral Chester Nimitz, aimed to bypass heavily fortified Japanese-held islands and instead target those that were strategically valuable for airfields and naval bases. The Island Hopping Campaign was characterized by amphibious assaults on key islands, such as Guadalcanal, Tarawa, Saipan, and Iwo Jima. These operations were fiercely contested, with brutal battles fought in dense jungles and on heavily fortified beaches. The Island Hopping Campaign was a grueling and hard-fought series of battles, but it gradually turned the tide of the Pacific War in favor of the Allies. The capture of these strategic islands allowed the United States to establish bases from which they could launch air raids and naval operations deep into Japanese-held territory. The Battle of Midway in June 1942, where the U.S. Navy decisively defeated the Japanese fleet, was a turning point in the Pacific War. It halted Japanese expansion and marked the beginning of a slow, methodical advance by the Allies towards Japan. The attack on Pearl Harbor was a pivotal moment in World War II, propelling the United States into the conflict and igniting a fierce determination to avenge the loss and secure victory. The subsequent island-hopping campaign demonstrated the resilience and strategic acumen of the U.S. military, ultimately leading to the rollback of Japanese territorial gains and the eventual end of the war in the Pacific. It was a testament to the resolve of nations and the enduring human spirit in the face of adversity. On June 22, 1941, the world witnessed one of the most significant turning points of World War II as Nazi Germany launched Operation Barbarossa, the invasion of the Soviet Union. This story delves into the motivations behind Hitler's audacious move and the brutal consequences that followed. Adolf Hitler's ambitions were not limited to the conquest of Western Europe. He harbored a deep-seated desire to expand German influence to the east, specifically into the vast territories of the Soviet Union. Hitler believed in the concept of Lebensraum, or living space, for the German people, and he saw the fertile lands of the East as the answer to Germany's economic problems. Operation Barbarossa involved the largest invasion force in history at that time, with around 3 million German troops and thousands of tanks and aircraft. The initial stages of the invasion were marked by swift advances as German forces overwhelmed Soviet defenses. Key cities and regions, including Kiev and Smolensk, fell to the Germans. The brutality of the Eastern Front was stark. German Einsatzgruppen followed the army, carrying out mass shootings of Jews, communists, and perceived enemies. The invasion unleashed a campaign of terror and devastation that would continue for years. One of the most infamous episodes of Barbarossa was the siege of Leningrad. The city endured a horrific 872-day blockade, during which residents faced starvation, disease, and relentless shelling. It is estimated that over 1 million civilians perished during the siege. As German forces advanced deeper into the Soviet Union, they set their sights on Stalingrad. The Battle of Stalingrad, which raged from August 23, 1942, to February 2, 1943, would become one of the deadliest battles in history and a pivotal turning point in World War II. The battle for Stalingrad was marked by intense urban combat, with brutal house-to-house fighting. The city's name was symbolic for both sides, and neither was willing to yield. The Soviets, under the command of General Georgy Zhukov, launched a counteroffensive that encircled the German Sixth Army inside the city. In early 1943, the situation for the German Sixth Army became increasingly dire. Surrounded and cut off from supplies, the German soldiers faced starvation and exhaustion. On February 2, 1943, General Friedrich Paulus, the commander of the Sixth Army, surrendered. It was a humiliating defeat for Nazi Germany and a turning point in the Eastern Front. The Battle of Stalingrad marked the beginning of a long and painful Soviet advance westward, leading to the eventual capture of Berlin in 1945. It also signaled the end of Germany's offensive capabilities on the Eastern Front. The Eastern Front of World War II was a theater of unimaginable suffering and sacrifice, with millions of soldiers and civilians losing their lives. Barbarossa, while initially successful for Germany, ultimately proved to be a catastrophic miscalculation, as it drew the Soviet Union into the Allied camp and set the stage for the eventual defeat of Nazi Germany. Going back a little bit, the Battle of Stalingrad, a harrowing and protracted conflict, stands as a symbol of resilience and determination in the face of unimaginable adversity. This story recounts the pivotal events of the battle and its significance as a turning point in World War II. Stalingrad, a major industrial city on the banks of the Volga River, held immense strategic importance. It was a critical transportation hub, and control of the city would open the way to the Caucasus oil fields, a vital resource for the German war effort. The Battle of Stalingrad began on August 23, 1942, when German forces, led by General Friedrich Paulus, launched a massive assault on the city. The initial German advances were swift, and they managed to capture large parts of the city. However, the Soviet defenders, under the leadership of General Georgy Zhukov and the political commissar Nikita Khrushchev, put up a fierce resistance. They engaged in close-quarter combat, often in ruined buildings and factories. The Soviets utilized a strategy of attrition, wearing down the German forces through a war of attrition. By November 1942, the situation for the German Sixth Army, which was trapped in the city, became desperate. The Soviets launched a massive counteroffensive, encircling the German forces. Starved, battered, and running low on supplies, the German soldiers were in a dire situation. On February 2, 1943, General Paulus surrendered, marking the first time in the war that a full German army had capitulated. The Battle of Stalingrad had turned the tide of the Eastern Front. The Battle of Stalingrad was one of the deadliest battles in history. Both sides suffered immense casualties, with estimates of over 2 million killed, wounded, or captured. The city itself was left in ruins, a stark testament to the brutality of the conflict. The victory at Stalingrad was a monumental turning point for the Soviet Union and the Allies. It was the beginning of a relentless Soviet advance westward, ultimately leading to the capture of Berlin in 1945. Stalingrad serves as a symbol of courage and endurance, where ordinary people were thrust into extraordinary circumstances and refused to yield. It is a reminder of the sacrifices made during the darkest days of World War II and the indomitable human spirit that prevails even in the face of overwhelming adversity. In the vast deserts of North Africa, two brilliant military commanders faced off in a series of epic battles that would determine the fate of the region during World War II. This story explores the clash between Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, the Desert Fox, and General Bernard Montgomery, culminating in the pivotal Battle of El Alamein. North Africa became a crucial theater in World War II, primarily due to its strategic significance and access to critical supply lines. Control of North Africa offered a gateway to the oil-rich Middle East and the Suez Canal, a vital shipping route. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, a charismatic and daring German commander, earned the nickname Desert Fox for his remarkable success in North Africa. Leading the Afrika Korps, Rommel employed blitzkrieg tactics, characterized by rapid advances, encirclements, and hit-and-run attacks. His forces swept across North Africa, threatening Egypt and the Suez Canal. In August 1942, General Bernard Montgomery, a British commander known for his meticulous planning and discipline, was appointed to lead the British Eighth Army in North Africa. Montgomery inherited a demoralized and depleted force, but he was determined to halt Rommel's advance. The Battle of El Alamein, fought from July 1 to November 4, 1942, would become one of the most significant battles of World War II. Montgomery meticulously prepared for the engagement, building defensive fortifications and stockpiling supplies. His plan focused on attrition, wearing down the German and Italian forces through a series of deliberate offensives. The battle was characterized by fierce fighting, with both sides suffering heavy casualties. Montgomery's Eighth Army launched a major offensive on October 23, 1942, breaking through the German lines. The battle marked the beginning of the end for Rommel's Africa campaign. Rommel, facing dwindling supplies and mounting pressure from the Allies, ordered a retreat in early November 1942. The Battle of El Alamein was a decisive victory for the British and Commonwealth forces, shifting the balance of power in North Africa. Following the Battle of El Alamein, the Allies continued their advance, pursuing Rommel's forces westward. The North African campaign ended in May 1943 with the surrender of the remaining Axis forces. The Battle of El Alamein not only halted Rommel's advance but also boosted Allied morale and marked the beginning of a successful Allied campaign in North Africa. For sake of discussion, it's also worth noting, the Battle of El Alamein would become a defining moment in World War II. This story explores the epic confrontation between the British Eighth Army, under the command of General Bernard Montgomery, and the Axis forces led by Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, ultimately resulting in an Allied victory. The Battle of El Alamein, fought from July 1 to November 4, 1942, carried immense strategic significance. It was a critical juncture in the North African campaign, where the British Eighth Army faced off against the formidable Axis forces led by the renowned Desert Fox, Field Marshal Erwin Rommel. General Bernard Montgomery, a methodical and disciplined commander, took command of the British Eighth Army in August 1942. Recognizing the need to reverse the tide of Rommel's advance, Montgomery initiated a rigorous training and preparation regimen for his troops. The Battle of El Alamein was characterized by a series of engagements, with the front lines constantly shifting. Montgomery's strategy focused on attrition, wearing down the Axis forces through a combination of carefully planned offensives, artillery barrages, and a comprehensive logistics system. On October 23, 1942, Montgomery launched a major offensive, Operation Lightfoot, with a massive artillery barrage and a meticulously coordinated assault. The battle-hardened soldiers of the Eighth Army made significant progress, gradually breaking through the Axis defenses. Facing mounting pressure and dwindling supplies, Rommel ordered a retreat on November 4, 1942. The Battle of El Alamein had turned the tide of the North African campaign. Rommel's forces withdrew westward, pursued relentlessly by the Allies. The Battle of El Alamein marked a turning point in the North African campaign. Montgomery's victory bolstered Allied morale and momentum. It also opened the way for the Allied forces to push further westward across North Africa, eventually leading to the surrender of the remaining Axis forces in May 1943. The Holocaust, one of the darkest chapters in human history, witnessed the systematic persecution and genocide of millions of Jews during World War II. This story explores the horrors of the Holocaust and the mechanisms through which the Nazis carried out their campaign of hatred. Adolf Hitler and the Nazi regime, driven by virulent antisemitism, embarked on a path of persecution and extermination that would become known as the Holocaust. The origins of this tragedy can be traced back to the early 1930s when the Nazis rose to power in Germany. In 1935, the Nuremberg Laws were enacted, institutionalizing racial discrimination and anti-Semitic policies in Nazi Germany. These laws stripped German Jews of their citizenship and introduced a range of discriminatory measures, including restrictions on marriage and employment. On November 9 to 10, 1938, a violent pogrom known as Kristallnacht erupted across Germany. Nazi paramilitary forces and civilians attacked Jewish homes, businesses, and synagogues, leaving a trail of destruction and death. Thousands of Jews were arrested, and the event served as a harbinger of the horrors to come. In January 1942, high-ranking Nazi officials gathered at the Wannsee Conference in Berlin to formalize plans for the final solution. This euphemistic term referred to the systematic extermination of the Jewish people. The conference laid out plans for mass deportations to extermination camps and the construction of gas chambers. The Nazis established a network of concentration camps and extermination camps across Europe. Concentration camps were places of forced labor, starvation, and brutality, where inmates endured unimaginable suffering. Extermination camps, such as Auschwitz, Sobibor, and Treblinka, were designed solely for the mass murder of those who arrived. Auschwitz, the most notorious extermination camp, saw the murder of over 1 million people, primarily Jews, through a combination of gas chambers, shootings, and forced labor. The scale of suffering at Auschwitz and other camps defies comprehension. As Allied forces advanced through Europe in 1944 and 1945, they began to liberate concentration and extermination camps. The scenes that greeted the liberators were nightmarish: emaciated survivors, mass graves, and the evidence of unspeakable cruelty. In the aftermath of World War II, the international community sought justice for the perpetrators of the Holocaust and other war crimes. The Nuremberg trials, held in 1945 to 1946, brought leading Nazi officials to trial for crimes against humanity. The trials established important principles of international law and accountability. The Holocaust stands as a haunting reminder of the depths of human cruelty and the consequences of unchecked hatred. The memory of the Holocaust serves as a solemn vow to prevent such atrocities from happening again and to stand against prejudice and discrimination in all its forms. By the end of World War II brought with it the liberation of Europe from Nazi tyranny and the pursuit of justice for those responsible for the horrors of the Holocaust. Here we will discuss the liberation of concentration camps and the historic Nuremberg trials. As Allied forces advanced through Europe in 1944 and 1945, they encountered a harrowing and unexpected sight: concentration and extermination camps where the Nazis had carried out their campaign of death and brutality. The liberation of these camps was a moment of profound significance. Liberating soldiers, many of whom were profoundly moved by what they witnessed, encountered emaciated survivors, mass graves, and evidence of unimaginable suffering. The survivors, many of whom were in a state of physical and psychological trauma, faced a long and difficult journey toward recovery. In the wake of World War II, the international community sought to hold the perpetrators of the Holocaust and other war crimes accountable for their actions. The Nuremberg trials, held from November 20, 1945, to October 1, 1946, were a landmark moment in the pursuit of justice. Leading Nazi officials, including Hermann Göring, Rudolf Hess, and Joachim von Ribbentrop, were among the 24 defendants at the Nuremberg trials. They faced charges of crimes against humanity, war crimes, and crimes against peace. The Nuremberg trials established important principles of international law, including the notion that individuals, regardless of their official positions, could be held accountable for their actions. The trials also underscored the gravity of war crimes and crimes against humanity. The verdicts at the Nuremberg trials were mixed. Several defendants were sentenced to death by hanging, while others received lengthy prison terms. Some were acquitted. The trials, however, sent a powerful message that the international community would not tolerate impunity for those who committed heinous acts. The legacy of the Nuremberg trials extends far beyond the courtroom. They set a precedent for subsequent war crime tribunals and the development of international law. The liberation of concentration camps and the pursuit of justice through the Nuremberg trials stand as testament to the resilience of the human spirit, the determination to hold wrongdoers accountable, and the commitment to ensure that the horrors of the Holocaust are never forgotten. World War II brought together a coalition of nations known as the Allied Powers, united by their common goal of defeating fascism and tyranny. This story explores the diverse nations that comprise the Allies and their collective determination to combat the Axis forces. As World War II erupted across the globe, nations with different histories, cultures, and ideologies found common cause in opposing the aggressive expansion of the Axis powers. The Allies formed as a counterbalance to the growing threat posed by Nazi Germany, Italy, and Japan. The United States, led by President Franklin D. Roosevelt, played a pivotal role in the Allied coalition. Its industrial might, vast resources, and commitment to democracy made it a linchpin of the alliance. Under the leadership of Prime Minister Winston Churchill, the United Kingdom stood as a resolute bastion against Nazi aggression, enduring the Blitz and maintaining an unwavering determination to resist. Despite a turbulent history, the Soviet Union, led by Joseph Stalin, became a crucial member of the Allies after the Nazi invasion in 1941. The Eastern Front would become one of the most significant theaters of the war. China, under the leadership of Chiang Kai-shek, had been resisting Japanese aggression since the 1930s. Its tenacity and resilience were instrumental in tying down Japanese forces in Asia. While France initially fell to Nazi Germany in 1940, the Free French forces, led by Charles de Gaulle, continued to fight alongside the Allies and played a vital role in the liberation of France. The Allied powers encompassed a broad spectrum of nations, including Australia, Canada, New Zealand, India, Belgium, Greece, Norway, the Netherlands, Poland, and many others. Each made unique contributions to the Allied cause, whether through troops, resources, or intelligence. Despite their differences, the Allied powers were united by a shared commitment to democracy, freedom, and the defeat of fascism. They overcame logistical challenges, political complexities, and cultural distinctions to form a formidable coalition against the Axis powers. The Allies' victory in World War II laid the groundwork for the post-war world order. The United Nations, established in 1945, aimed to promote international cooperation and prevent future conflicts. The defeat of fascism marked a triumph of democratic values over totalitarianism. World War II saw the emergence of the Axis powers, a coalition of nations driven by aggression, expansionism, and a shared commitment to authoritarian ideologies. This story explores the key members of the Axis and their collective pursuit of dominance. The Axis powers coalesced around a common desire for territorial expansion and the dismantling of the existing international order. The Axis was marked by its aggressive pursuit of power and the subjugation of other nations. Under the leadership of Adolf Hitler, Nazi Germany pursued an aggressive policy of expansion, violating international treaties and initiating conflicts. The invasion of Poland in 1939 marked the beginning of World War II. Italy, led by Benito Mussolini, joined Nazi Germany in 1939 to form the Rome-Berlin Axis. Italy sought territorial gains in Europe and Africa, including Ethiopia and Albania. Japan, under Emperor Hirohito and the militaristic leadership, embarked on a campaign of imperial expansion in Asia. The invasion of China in the 1930s and the attack on Pearl Harbor in 1941 drew Japan into the war. While Nazi Germany, Italy, and Japan were the principal Axis powers, other nations, such as Hungary, Romania, Bulgaria, and Finland, joined or aligned with the Axis for various reasons, including territorial ambitions or ideological affinity. The Axis powers pursued their expansionist goals through aggression and conquest. Nazi Germany's blitzkrieg tactics rapidly overran much of Europe. Italy sought to establish an empire in Africa and expand its influence in the Mediterranean. Japan aimed to create a greater East Asia co-prosperity sphere through military conquest. As the war progressed, the Axis powers faced mounting resistance from the Allied coalition. The combined efforts of the Allies on multiple fronts, including the Eastern Front against the Soviet Union, North Africa, and the Pacific, gradually eroded the Axis powers' strength. The aggressive expansionist policies of the Axis powers led to widespread devastation, suffering, and loss of life. The Holocaust, initiated by Nazi Germany, resulted in the systematic genocide of millions of Jews and other minority groups. The Axis powers' pursuit of dominance through aggression and conquest ultimately led to their defeat. World War II marked a turning point in history, highlighting the destructive consequences of aggressive expansionism and the importance of international cooperation in preserving peace and stability. June 6, 1944, known as D-Day, marked one of the most monumental events in World War II, the Allied invasion of Normandy. This story delves into the planning, execution, and significance of Operation Overlord, a daring and audacious endeavor that changed the course of the war. By 1944, the Allies had successfully liberated North Africa and Italy but faced a critical need for a second front in Western Europe to challenge Nazi Germany. The Soviet Union had been bearing the brunt of the Eastern Front, and opening a Western Front was essential to relieve pressure on the Soviets and hasten the end of the war. Operation Overlord, the code name for the Normandy invasion, was meticulously planned over several years. General Dwight D. Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of the Allied Expeditionary Force, led the planning efforts. The invasion's success hinged on secrecy, timing, and the element of surprise. On the morning of June 6, 1944, the largest amphibious assault force in history assembled off the coast of Normandy. Over 156,000 troops from the United States, Great Britain, Canada, and other Allied nations embarked on a perilous journey across the English Channel. The Normandy coastline was divided into 5 sectors, each with a codename: Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword. These beaches were the focal points of the assault. The landing was met with fierce German resistance, particularly at Omaha Beach, where American forces faced a daunting challenge. Despite initial setbacks and heavy casualties, Allied troops persevered and gained a foothold on the beaches. They pushed inland, securing crucial objectives and paving the way for additional troops and supplies to land. D-Day marked a significant turning point in World War II. It demonstrated the Allied commitment to liberating Western Europe and served as a catalyst for the eventual defeat of Nazi Germany. Over the following months, Allied forces pushed through France and into Germany, relentlessly pursuing the enemy. The Normandy invasion remains an enduring symbol of courage, determination, and cooperation among the Allied nations. The sacrifices made on that fateful day, by soldiers and civilians alike, are commemorated annually on D-Day and remembered as a testament to the fight for freedom and the pursuit of a just and peaceful world. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, in August 1945, marked a tragic turning point in human history. This story explores the events leading up to the bombings, the devastating aftermath, and the profound impact these events had on the course of World War II and the world. The development of atomic weapons was one of the most secretive and ambitious scientific endeavors of World War II. The Manhattan Project, led by the United States, involved brilliant scientists such as Robert Oppenheimer and Enrico Fermi. It aimed to harness the power of the atom. By mid-1945, Japan had not surrendered, and the war in the Pacific was still raging. The United States faced a difficult decision, whether to deploy atomic bombs as a means to hasten Japan's surrender. President Harry S. Truman, with input from military advisors, ultimately authorized their use. On August 6, 1945, a B-29 bomber named the Enola Gay dropped an atomic bomb, codenamed Little Boy, over the Japanese city of Hiroshima. The explosion instantly killed tens of thousands of people and caused widespread destruction. Just 3 days later, on August 9, 1945, another B-29 bomber, named Bockscar, dropped a second atomic bomb, codenamed Fat Man, over the city of Nagasaki. The damage and casualties were similarly catastrophic. The bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki had immediate and devastating effects. Tens of thousands were killed instantly, and many more suffered horrific injuries. The cities were left in ruins, and survivors faced the long-term effects of radiation exposure. The shock of the atomic bombings, coupled with the Soviet Union's entry into the war against Japan, led to Japan's surrender on August 15, 1945. World War II was finally over, and the world had entered the atomic age. The atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki have left an indelible mark on history. The bombings also initiated the nuclear arms race between the United States and the Soviet Union, leading to the Cold War. In the aftermath of the bombings, there were calls for nuclear disarmament and the promotion of peaceful coexistence among nations. The Hibakusha, survivors of the bombings, became advocates for peace and the abolition of nuclear weapons. Today, the memory of the atomic bombings serves as a somber reminder of the destructive potential of nuclear weapons. Efforts to prevent their use and work towards a world free of nuclear weapons continue to be of paramount importance, with the hope that the horrors of Hiroshima and Nagasaki will never be repeated. The end of World War II marked the beginning of a new era, with profound implications for the world. In the wake of this global conflict, two key developments would shape the post-war landscape: the formation of the United Nations and the onset of the Cold War. In the aftermath of World War II, there was a clear recognition of the need for a new international organization to prevent future conflicts and promote cooperation among nations. This led to the establishment of the United Nations, which officially came into existence on October 24, 1945, when its charter was ratified. The UN Charter, signed by 51 member states, outlined the organization's goals and principles. These included maintaining international peace and security, promoting human rights, fostering social and economic development, and providing a platform for dialogue among nations. One of the central features of the UN was the creation of the Security Council, composed of 5 permanent members: the United States, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, China, and France, and 10 rotating members. The Security Council was tasked with maintaining peace and security, and had the authority to take collective military action in response to threats to international peace. The UN General Assembly, comprised of all member states, served as a forum for nations to discuss and address global issues. Each member state had one vote, making it a democratic platform for diplomacy and decision-making. The UN played a pivotal role in advancing human rights and international law. The Universal Declaration of Human Rights, adopted by the General Assembly in 1948, set forth fundamental rights and freedoms to be protected globally. The Nuremberg trials, held to prosecute Nazi war criminals, established principles of accountability under international law. While the formation of the United Nations held promise for international cooperation, the end of World War II also ushered in a new era of geopolitical tension known as the Cold War. One of the immediate post-war challenges was the division of Germany. The victorious Allied powers, the United States, the United Kingdom, the Soviet Union, and France, occupied different zones of Germany. The city of Berlin was similarly divided into East and West Berlin. The Cold War was characterized by an ideological conflict between the United States and its Western allies, which embraced democracy and capitalism, and the Soviet Union and its Eastern Bloc allies, which espoused communism. These opposing ideologies created deep-seated mistrust and competition for global influence. Winston Churchill famously referred to the division of Europe as the Iron Curtain. This metaphorical divide separated Western Europe from Eastern Europe and the Soviet-controlled states, creating a geopolitical fault line. The Cold War saw an arms race between the United States and the Soviet Union, each stockpiling nuclear weapons and conventional military forces. The fear of mutually assured destruction served as a deterrent to direct conflict but heightened global tensions. Rather than engaging in direct military confrontation, the superpowers often fought proxy wars in other parts of the world. The Korean War and the Vietnam War were examples of such conflicts where the United States and the Soviet Union supported opposing sides. The Cold War extended into space exploration with the space race. The launch of the Soviet satellite Sputnik in 1957 marked the beginning of this competition, which culminated in the United States landing the first humans on the Moon in 1969. Over time, there were periods of détente and diplomatic efforts to ease tensions between the superpowers. Strategic arms limitation agreements aimed to reduce the risk of nuclear conflict. The aftermath of World War II was a complex and transformative period in history. The formation of the United Nations provided a platform for international cooperation and the promotion of peace and human rights. However, the onset of the Cold War introduced a new era of geopolitical rivalry and tension, shaping the global landscape for decades to come. The legacies of these developments continue to influence international relations and global politics in the present day.